John, a very warm virtual welcome to Ivey. It is a real pleasure to be hosting you as a part of our Leadership Day. And like Gerard said, I must admit, for someone who spent their entire formative years on a basketball court, almost literally every day, at a range of levels and teams, it is a thrill to be hosting a Raptor today. And I certainly do consider you a Raptor, even if you're not the one with the ball in your hand. So as I mentioned, our students have been provided with a full bio, so they have all of those details. But before we get into the questions we've drafted for you, would you take a moment to introduce yourself by sharing with our students something that about you that they would not find online or perhaps rarely gets highlighted in your bio?
So Kim, first I want to say thank you to the University of Western. Thank you to everyone on the call for allowing me to speak. Really looking forward to it over the last couple of days, and I'm excited to be chatting with everyone today. But Kim, I think if we're gonna have some energy today, I need to know what position you played in basketball, because I was a center, so I need to know if you were passing me the ball as a point guard, or were you a center and we were setting screens for each other. What position did you play in basketball?
Well, I wouldn't have been, we called it post, so a post position, so not quite a center, but certainly as I sort of elevated my level of play, I went out to being out on the wing. In some early arenas, being 5'10" is tall. Once you get into the upper echelons of basketball, you're getting kind of short. So I moved further out as I went sort of up the ranks. So yeah.
Okay, great. I love it. I did the same thing, right? I was 6'5". I was the center as long as I knew, and then as I went on, all of a sudden there's 6'7", 6'9", 6'10", and I moved to the wing. So I love it. We're gonna have some good chemistry.
For sure.
In terms of something that you might not know about me, I don't know a lot of people know that I'm a pretty avid sneakerhead. It's always been about shoes. I could care less really what else I'm wearing, but if my shoes are on point, then I'm pretty good. And you'll see them in the back. I actually love the fact that I get to incorporate shoes into my job now and use them as statement pieces to start conversations, whether they're Black History Month shoes or LGBTQ pride shoes. And so I've got a pretty robust collection that, at times I run out of space with, and I've got to sometimes donate some pairs just to stay relevant. But when it comes to shoes, that's my gig, and everybody knows that.
As you know, this day is focused on leadership. And here at Ivey, we constantly try to stress to all of our students that it's essential for them to take ownership of their leadership development and career, and ensure that whatever they do reflects positively on them as a professional. So what does taking ownership of your leadership career mean to you? And can you share a few lessons or insights with our students surrounding that?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question in terms of understanding not only the ownership of leadership, but whether or not you are or want to be a leader. And I think that's kind of where I'd start with the answer to the question. I recall, being in a position with one of the Canadian basketball teams that I was working for, and I was being inundated with requests and tasks, but I'd been hired as like the sales rep. And I knew I had previous experience in leading organizations and in other areas, but I had to make the decision that I was going to invest myself as a leader in that organization. It wasn't appointed to me. I didn't receive a leadership or management position to start off with. It wasn't communicated to the organization that I was going to be someone who was a leader, but I made the personal decision that, I want to excel in this area, in this industry, and in that organization. And so I was going to take a leadership mentality with respects to building up the team in order for us to start the season. So I just think first you got to decide that you want to be a leader. Leadership isn't for everybody, right? And I think there's some people that innately have the tact, to some people that have to grow those skill sets, but you got to decide whether or not you want to be a leader or not, and then actually take those steps forward to being it. So that's kind of the first thing that I think about the question. The next thing is to understand that if you're going to be a leader, people need to trust you and they need to have buy-in with you, is how I would kind of look at it. You're a leader, which means people are following. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but they are looking to you. I constantly realize in my role today that I've got a lot of great people in our organization here at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment that do great things, but they need direction. And usually they're coming to me for direction. And you've got to be able to provide that in direction. You've got to be able to have that buy-in, that they understand what you're saying, communicating, where you're leading them, so they can go be their best selves, so they can go be the experts in the areas that they want to be in. So once you determine that you want to be a leader in any given space, whether it's in your family or whether it's at work, then I think you've got to make sure that people are bought into that fact, because otherwise it's just conflict. It doesn't really work well.
Excellent. I think somehow intuitively you were channeling some of the work that we do at the Leadership Institute, because we focus on leader character, and we really focus on that leadership is about the disposition and not the position to lead all the time. And so I think certainly the beginning part of your answer really tapped into that, and then moving into aspects of trust. So thank you very much. Before we dive into your role with the Raptors, I also wanted to ask you about coaching. I know you were a passionate coach for kids and young people throughout leagues in the States and in Canada. And how did you grow and change as a leader through that experience of coaching and developing youth?
Thanks for asking that as well. You guys have done a lot of great research looking over the questions. So that's pretty cool. I think I've always found myself in some sort of leadership position, and especially when it comes to youth. I actually started coaching in sport camp. That was my first job at 16 years old for the city of Brampton in summer camps, right? And I think you then identify that, okay, well, you're leading these kids, whether it's to the swimming pool or whether it's to play basketball or soccer. I've always had that connection with the younger generation with respects to, just showing them a positive opportunity and a positive path, maybe being a positive role model to them. Where I got involved with coaching on basketball on a higher level was almost in the same fashion. I was asked if I wanted to coach basketball for a house league, and I'd never coached before, like not from a X's and O's whiteboard league standpoint. And so I took that opportunity to just say I wanted to be involved in the community, and I gained a passion, and the passion was twofold. One was the strategic X and O's and technicalities of winning a game, of putting people in a position to be successful, of learning and understanding how to make adjustments. All of those aspects are what really attracted me to coaching. But the other part was the mentorship and the teaching part of skill sets, of understanding the game, of basketball as a philosophy and basketball as a tool for life. And being able to teach these younger kids, that's where my true passion started to develop itself in a leadership role, because I became a mentor to them. And I think we all understand that in some capacity, whether you're a teacher or a professor or a coach, you can be a mentor to someone. And that really, really resonated with me. I enjoyed not only teaching them and watching them implement their skill set, but I enjoyed teaching and watching them grow as young men and as young women. And that just fostered and grew into more teams and a larger program and a not-for-profit, because you started to realize there was so much more opportunity that we could give some of the youth down there that were underrepresented. But they were bought into me, to my other point. A lot of people were really bought into what I was doing and who I was. And I took that responsibility on as a leader to say, you know what, then I want to do more, or I want to do as much as I can. So my coaching career kind of established itself, but it really did nest itself with respects to being able to help other people. And I'll tell you what I realized is when I got to the pro level and I was coaching here in Canada, I didn't enjoy it. It was a different interaction. All of a sudden, they didn't need teaching and mentorship and knowledge with respects to the game, because they already felt they knew what they had to do. Now it was about money and agents and contracts, and that I wasn't attracted to that. I actually told myself I don't think I'd ever coach pro basketball, because my strength was in leading kind of the younger generation and helping them. So coaching is just another manifestation of leadership for me, but it all falls under the umbrella of helping other people, which is extremely important to me.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's amazing. So that actually dovetails perfectly into the next question that I have for you, in that you are the co-founder and CEO of Focused Dreams Forward, which is a foundation created to enrich the academic and athletic opportunities for youth in the Caribbean, while also building their self-esteem and leadership skills. So obviously there's a passion there, but what else sparked the creation of this particular organization? And Why was this important to you, in the Caribbean in particular?
So the Caribbean is near and dear to my heart. Both of my parents are from St. Lucia in the West Indies. And when I was young, instead of being sent to summer camp or up north to a college, I was sent down to the Caribbean. And in a small village where I could run around and do everything, but everybody would police me, everybody would parent me. But I got a true affinity for the culture, for the island, for the work ethic, for the beauty and the resources, for the people, the music, everything about the islands. It is ingrained in me. It is a part of who I am. I'm a proud Caribbean and West Indian. And so in 2015, if everybody remembers, we were hosting All Star. And Masai launched a documentary for Giants of Africa, his not-for-profit foundation. And it was astonishing to see what he had done in terms of growing what was just basketball camps into an entire movement for an entire continent. The part that resonated on my end was that the kids that I saw him working with looked exactly like the kids that were in the Caribbean. And I just couldn't get that out of my head. So then going back to sense of responsibility, I thought, well, I want to do something. And my cause has always been to give back to the Caribbean. But when I told you I have a lot of shoes, well, at some point I need to make some space. I ship the shoes down. When I've got donations that I want to make, I send them down. I remember as a kid, I used to bring, when you're allowed 2 pieces of luggage to travel, I'd have one for myself and one just full of toys and games and whatever else I could to give to other kids while I was down there, because they were all my friends. So I've always said people have their cause. Some people it's the environment. Some people it's, the fight against cancer. Some people it's the fight against social justice. My philanthropy growing up was always to give back to the Caribbean. So when I saw Giants of Africa and I saw what Masai was doing, I thought, I wonder how I can help. I wonder how I can do the same thing for the people that look like me and are like me down in the Caribbean, because I think it goes unnoticed that in the Caribbean, it's a rich pot of resource. And I know we all go there for vacation and we all go there to enjoy the beach and the sun and to get some relaxation, but surrounding that are people that make those industries run and that make those industries thrive. And I want to empower them. I want to support them. I want to show them that they too can have some of the same riches and luxuries that we go down there to enjoy. I went down to St. Lucia and I just started talking to people. How can I help? How can I get involved? I also found that the NBA was looking to invest in the Caribbean. They were already running camps and programs in Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. So I started to team up with the NBA to say, okay, well, how can I help? Because I think there's something very powerful in seeing somebody that relates to you and your culture. And that's where I had the relationships with the people in the Caribbean. And we started going down there for about 4 or 5 summers, running basketball camps every summer and getting the kids involved and teaching them and helping them feel like basketball was an outlet. And then one person came to me and they said, look, it's great that you guys do this every summer, but when you leave, what do we have? All of a sudden there's a drop off. We come every summer and then we leave. And then there's no more programming. There's no more knowledge transfer. There's no more leadership and education. And to sustain that, like you said, I'm not one of the guys that play on the court. I wanted to be able to be more deliberate and intentional with how I could help them. And, if I don't have the resources myself, then establishing a charity foundation allows me to go and secure those resources, secure that knowledge, secure those people that also want to come down and help. So my foundation gives me a platform to advocate for the youth in the Caribbean and allow people to support it. I think there's a lot of people who are 2nd generation and 1st generation Canadians who are from the Caribbean that would love to support it. And I'm hoping we can be the vehicle for that. So we're growing, we're trying to help, and it's something I get to dive my energy into in terms of a give back to a place I love so much.
Amazing. That's really inspirational. I love that. So now we will pivot to your role now with the Raptors. So at the time of your appointment as VP Organizational Culture and Inclusion, the team said in a press release, and I'm going to quote here, that you will lead a group drawn from all parts of the organization to address social injustice, inclusion, equity, and political reform, end quote. So I have a few questions for you related to this quote in particular. Firstly, how exactly do you personally address this, something of this magnitude? And really what I mean by this is, what does your day-to-day look like? How is that addressing implemented?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I forgot they wrote that because that's obviously before I got hired, right? So I think for me, the personal addressing really came down to the catalyst from George Floyd's murder was, how can I get involved? And as frustrated as I was, I am very much someone who doesn't sit in emotion very long. And so I moved forward. Well, if I'm upset about it, how can I do something about it? And I kept landing on, like, I work for a massive sports and entertainment organization here in Canada. And on top of that, specifically with the Toronto Raptors, and there's no two bigger platforms right now that would be able to assist. So I kept thinking to myself, how can I get involved? How can I use the platform that I have within my company and my team to affect change? And that kind of led, I don't know if I'm dating myself, I don't know how many of you guys have watched the Jerry Maguire movie before, but that led to my Jerry Maguire moment at 3 a.m. where I sent an email to our chief resource officer and our CEO at MLSE. And it was my dissertation on how MLSE needs to do more, right? And it all came from passion, and it all just came from, but I want to lead, like I want to be involved in it, right? So again, if we're talking about leadership, this wasn't just about me calling people out. It wasn't just about me pointing fingers. It wasn't just me about saying the company needs to do more. I ended my piece by saying, I want to be a part of that change. I want to lead it, and tell me how I can get involved. And I think that became the personal attachment too. If I'm gonna put myself out there, I need to be ready for it. And that's kind of what led towards this. I think I come with a diverse background with respects to coaching, business operations, former player, and I understand that there's a lot of different pieces of our operation and our business that I'm familiar with. So it allows me to take a step back, apply an equity, diversity, and inclusive lens to what we're doing, but I can also relate to all these different operations. So I think when you say my day-to-day is a lot of meetings, conference calls, and emails. But it is looking at how we do things and then trying to see how we can do it better, right? And how we can do it different, right? And that really helps a lot in terms of my day-to-day.
Right. So it really is clear that you have tons of passion. And what, really, I just want to ask you, what drives that sense of purpose, in that the challenges you face must be fairly formidable. This has been a long-rooted problem in society. And so I know with other colleagues or friends that I have who work in this arena in their lives, burnout is a significant issue with people who deal with social injustice on a daily basis and try to create change. So what gives you a sense of purpose and fuels you every day when perhaps the tank is getting low?
Yeah, another great question, because I'll be a bit vulnerable here, in that I hit that, right? I think it was somewhere around February. The job has a lot of negativity to it, right? And it's not just what's happening in the world, which every day something seems to be happening in the world that we need to address, right? But it's also, okay, so to know more about it, I believe as a good leader, you need to educate yourself, right? And so it's like, okay, well, I need to go learn more about it. And as you're learning it, you're reading a lot of negativity, right? Like if we're talking about the Indigenous community, and I didn't know much about residential schools. I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know about Canada's deep, dark history. So when you're reading it, like, you're just absorbing a lot of negativity. And that did hit me midway through the season last year. It was just like, this is a lot, and it's a lot to take on. I'm an energy person, and I try and keep a positive energy. But when you're constantly hearing and receiving and kind of being bombarded by negativity, it takes its toll. But we've got to, like I said, there's a sense of purpose to help other people, right? And truthfully, I think about all the other people that have fought for things. I think about all the other people that have invested their time in social justice or civil rights activism, or any of the other initiatives that are out there, and they endured much more than I have to. I have an opportunity to carry forward their flame and their torch, and I can do it in a way that can have change. And so that's the long-winded answer to what keeps me going is the fact that we can actually make and invest change. We can actually produce tangible things that will make improvements in people's lives and in our society and in our community, right? So for instance, when we did the all women's broadcast, that was great. And as hard as it was the entire time getting up to that, as many challenges we had working with the networks and the broadcast, and that day to see those 5 women up there being able to show the world what they were already prepared for, what they'd already worked towards, that they were already great. Like they were calling to thank me, and I was like, I couldn't have done it without you. If you weren't ready, we couldn't have done this. But those moments, all that charges me right back up. And there's the weight of the positive. It's much more substantial than the day-to-day toll that gets taken. And so I just have to remind myself that we've got to have wins along the way, right? I gotta invest in making sure there's a win today, because that win, that nugget of energy is so much bigger than any little thing that happens along the way.
Thank you for being vulnerable there. And also thank you for the women's broadcast. That was amazing. And I like how you tapped into sort of what you quantify as a tangible success. Can you give us maybe a couple of other examples of progress that you've seen, or a win, as you put it, since your time with the Raptors?
For sure. I think what's been difficult in this past year and why we're happy to be home is we were obviously split between Toronto and Tampa. But when we got to Tampa, we said, look, if this great city is going to do something for us, we want to make sure we do something for them. And if anyone had followed, we were able to do an installation to the tune of about $350,000 to build a facility down in Tampa. And that is not only going to go to supporting historically neglected youth in the area, but it's going to be a legacy item. And it's going to be something, one, that says, yeah, the Raptors were here, but it parallels to our MLSE Foundation launchpad that we have here in Toronto. And there's going to be this exchange now between kids here and kids there that get to interact. There's programming sharing that we're going to get to do, and resources that we get to provide. That to me is just another great win for us, that if the Raptors showed up in a community, we didn't just show up, play basketball, and leave. That speaks to our sense of responsibility. We're in a community, and to be able to leave that there was great. And the other one I'll call out right now is our partnership with the City of Toronto. And we've partnered with them on their Awakenings program. And what the Awakenings program is doing is it's allowing us to be in spaces that the Raptors have never been before, because it's an art and culture program. And as much as we're basketball and we're sports, we know that we've got fans that don't always resonate with sports. And maybe they come for the entertainment piece of what we do. But art and culture very much so is an education tool. And we're going to use art and culture as a way to talk to our fans and our community, educate our fans and our community about things that they might not know. So when we're able to put up an installation at one of the historical museums here in Toronto, it's going to start conversations. And those conversations are going to help other people learn, grow, and hopefully move forward with not only just social justice, but just social impact in our community. So I'm very proud of this partnership that we have with the city, because again, they've got all the resources, they've got all the history, they've got all the people. We've got the platform to amplify it. But we know that when we post something, more people are going to listen. And the other component it does is it brings people into our community. It makes people who are very familiar with art and culture feel more included by the Raptors, because we're showing that art and culture isn't important, or that it is important. I want to make that say. So it's not just about basketball. We're showing and tapping into other areas that allow other people to be included in what we do.
Thank you. I think it's so important to talk about those wins, because sometimes, the conversations around EDI, like you said, can go to the darker places constantly. And, you question whether your efforts are leading to change. So sharing these wins, your wins or the wins and the wins of others, helps feel like that progress is happening, not just something we want, but, is something that's moving forward. And that leads me into, I'm gonna quote back to you something that you said in an interview, where you said, quote, "For me, change is actionable. I don't want to just say things. They must be doable. I have a position of power and I want to do powerful things. So how do you exercise your power in a way that draws people in without perhaps them feeling that you're being demanding or intimidating? And how do you use your voice effectively in that way?
Sure. I try and be a friendly giant. Like I said, I'm about 6'5", and I want people to like me, but I also understand that yeah, like the need for change is here. And I think it is in tone, it is in delivery, it is in how we present ourselves. But I can't ever forget kind of why we're here, right? And that continues to motivate me. There are some what we call courageous conversations that we need to have. We also call them fearless dialogues, right? We need to speak on some of these things. And the message might not always be a soft or a polite one. Sometimes it's got to be a direct message. Sometimes you've got to remember that the Indigenous community is hurt, the Black community is frustrated, the LGBTQ2S plus community does not feel included, right? The women in our community don't feel safe. That's not something that you can sugarcoat. That's not something that you can just say, okay, well, you know, I'll speak softly to you about it and I hope you get it. Sometimes we got to have a forceful voice, right? But sometimes it's not being intimidating. Maybe it's being intentional, right? And so we coined the phrase here very early to be intentional with our actions, right? And that doesn't take an indirect approach. We're going to be very direct. I think sometimes people got to remember who I work for, right? I work for Masai. Masai's not shy about saying anything. And when you have that kind of leadership to follow, when you've got that kind of precedent to follow, then I understand it. And he's got his style and I have mine, but the message needs to come across. And in a time right now where people are looking for help, they're looking for direction, they're looking for inspiration, you know, sometimes we need to peel back some of the layers that we have and really get to the nitty gritty of what's going on. So yeah, I definitely don't want to come across demanding, but deliberate, I definitely do. And I was actually mentioned really early on. Sometimes you might ask somebody like, what's the best way to communicate with you? How would you like your feedback? How would you like me to speak on this? Right. And I think that's a powerful approach because everybody receives the communication differently. And if I feel like I can adjust my communication if I need to, but I also realize that I got to be my true self. And sometimes I got to tell it like it is. And so I'll preface that a lot of times, even sometimes on these calls to say, I hope you guys know that if you're asking me on, I'm going to be pretty direct. I'm going to say what's on my mind, and that might not be censored. That might not be sugar coated. And that's just the case. But I feel if that's the way the message has to get across, I will be true to the message, which is more important because I know we don't want to talk about some of these things, but we have to. We really do. And it's got to be less about how it was delivered and more about what was being said. Sometimes I feel like we try and put smoke and mirrors up around, okay, well, the way you said it allows you to not have to deal with what was said. And I think we've got to get back to the point of, I need you to understand what I'm saying, which is more important.
Mm-hmm. I love that phrase that you use, fearless dialogue, instead of perhaps difficult conversation. I think that's such a more powerful way to frame it. And we might circle back around to that. But one of the other things you were saying leads into my next question, which is something that you said where you said, quote, people are concerned, people are engaged. We have to be, because there's a huge problem. And as I said before, people have to address it. One of the things I worry about or believe is that there's actually a lot of non-believers out there, people who think EDI is overblown, perhaps think it's just a cover for being politically correct. I would also call them the eye rollers at best. So in your role, how do you handle the pushback on your ideas and actions? And how do you engage with those who are either fearful or reticent or even completely resistant to disrupting the status quo?
Yeah, try and navigate this question the right way. I think more times the world presents the truth. We can't ignore what's happening. If you're actually paying attention to what's happening in the world today, then you'll see the truth. Like the best thing, if anything positive came out of COVID, it was that we were all sitting at home with less distractions, with less opportunity to kind of deflect. And we saw how bad the world was with respects to racism and hate, right? And at that point, the reason why it resonated so much was because you couldn't just swipe it at that. Like, you couldn't just go to work, you couldn't just go to school. Like, you were stuck having to look at it. And so the world continues to present those things, right? Like unfortunately, the world has just shown us that when kids go to college, they might not always be safe. And it's unfortunate for what's happening over at Western right now, but that can't be ignored. That can't be denied. That's not something new that's happening to women on college campuses, but we're now in a place where we can start to address it, and you can't just turn a blind eye to it. Women don't feel safe, and here's the reason why, and we need to do something about it. That's the point. So I just don't think we're in a place anymore where someone can say it doesn't happen or it doesn't exist, because the world reminds us every single day, right? And then I think beyond that, we really are talking about, yeah, like what action are you going to take? What can you actually do? And we all have a platform. We all have some way and shape and form in which we can get involved. And I think that becomes crucial and important to making sure everybody does that. But there is no denying it. I think the other part to your question is that people need to educate themselves. They really do. I think a lot of time that ignorance, that, oh, it's not happening, oh, that like I didn't know about it, or it's not that bad, that comes down to really educating yourself. If we want to know something in this information age, there's plenty of resources to go find it. I'm a product of that. There's a lot in this role that I didn't know about, but I've been able to pull up all sorts of resources, writings, articles, essays, take courses to help educate me on where the world has kind of brought itself to today. So when someone says that, I merely think it's about educating themselves. And I'll give you an example. Masai got interviewed during the season last year, and he was interviewed by one of the players on another team. And they said, why are you involved in the Black Lives Matter? Like you guys are in Canada, it doesn't affect you. It's just like, what are you talking about? But I think we know sometimes Americans are in their bubble and they don't know what's happening north or south or across any other border, because all they know is what's happening in their backyard. Understanding that racism exists in Canada, that we are subject to racism in Canada. Understanding that Black Lives Matter is not an American issue, it's a global issue. And so he needs to educate himself. We needed to educate him, right? Just on the fact that this has nothing to do with why we would be involved. Even at the baseline of, we've got American players here who work on our team that we want to support. That's why we get involved. So it's just sometimes people aren't thinking and they're not educating themselves. And that is the positive Canadian side of me saying, all right, well, we'll help you, we'll educate you, and we'll try and move forward with it. But there's no blind eyes anymore. We don't accept that.
Great. And that so moves perfectly into the next one. So the next question that I have for you really does relate to that global perspective of the Black Lives Matter movement. And, maybe I'm even asking you this as, John, the citizen, as opposed to John, the role with the Raptors. But, I think we do often look to the US and think of ourselves as being different. A common view amongst Canadians is that we're too nice, we're too polite, we're too embracing of multiculturalism. We're the mosaic and not the melting pot. And we're not a racist society. And oftentimes we often smugly compare ourselves to the US and think, oh, it's not like that up here. But the reality is, and as I heard one commentator put it, is that Canada is racist. We just have better PR. And which certainly seems to be the case if you look as well at the 2021 Black Canadian National Survey, where nearly all Black Canadians, so 96%, said that they think racism is an issue in the workplace, with 78% deeming it a severe issue. Those are huge numbers. Whereas on the other side of things, 56% of white Canadians categorize workplace racism as a small problem or no problem at all. So how do we ensure here in Canada that people quit believing our own false PR and that we live in some sort of post-racial society?
Yeah, the racism here in Canada just isn't overt, right? It isn't in your face police brutality. It isn't in your face people dying in the streets, right? The racism in Canada here is construction sites in Toronto with nooses hanging from them inside of them. right? The racism here in Canada has to do with not allowing people to get certain jobs because we've systematically redlined them and put barriers in front of them. The racism here in Canada is not the fair distribution of wealth that we have here. It's much more systemic, right? It's much more indirect as opposed to overt and in your face. But again, the world always shows itself. It always does, right? A lot of people, everyone on this call, all 200 plus people that are on the 600 something people that are on the call, they understand the Underground Railroad, right? Black slaves would flee America. We all know how bad it is in America. They would flee America and use the Underground Railroad to come to Canada, right? Like Martin Luther King called Canada the Northern Star. They actually used that as a code on the Underground Railroad because that was the promised place to go to. A lot of people don't know that racism was so bad in Canada that as soon as America opened up civil rights, Black people left and went back to America because it was that bad in Canada. Educate yourselves on it. The world will continue to show itself. We are currently dealing with a 5,000 plus body count of unmarked graves for Indigenous people at the hands of first our government, who approved a residential school system to eradicate the Indigenous history through genocide. That's our history. But systemically, we decided we're not going to teach that in school. I didn't learn it in school. Nobody else learned it in school. We decided we're going to take that out of the history books and only talk about these other wonderful things that make Canada happen. So yes, we have this false perception of ourselves, and we, this generation, all of you, have an opportunity to change that. We can rewrite history. We can include the right pieces into history if we want to, because it does exist in our country. And if we are truly going to be Canadians, true to who we are, because you know what? We are nice, and we are a mosaic, and we are beautiful people that take care of others. Those are true Canadian traits. I don't want to say that we're not. Those are. We also have to own the other pieces of ourselves. We have to own the other components that make us Canadian. And then we've got a responsibility to say, okay, how can we be better? We're not responsible for what happened before, but we're responsible for how we move forward. And so now that we know, we've got to do better. And I think that's the part around, does racism exist in Canada? We all know it does. They're just, I don't submit to people don't understand that anymore. And if you still don't, I've got articles and links that I'll send you so that you understand it. But for all of us who do know, we've got to teach everyone else. We've got to figure out a way forward, right? Like we had a tough decision this past July on, do we celebrate Canada Day? Well, I'm a born and raised Canadian. I'm celebrating Canada Day, but I'm celebrating it differently, right? I'm celebrating it with a sense of responsibility. I'm celebrating it with a sense of kinship and allyship to the people in this country that have suffered so much. I'm celebrating it by saying I'm going to be a better Canadian, not just I am Canadian. And I think that's the piece we got to look at in understanding that this is what our country is. This is who our country is, but who it's going to be and what it's going to be as we move forward can change dramatically if we wanted to.
I love that about not just I am Canadian, I'm going to be a better Canadian. And I think that's a great lesson even for this leadership day. Not I am a leader, I'm going to be a better leader, because really the day is all about how leaders learn for their whole lives. So circling back a little bit to these, the fearless dialogues, or sometimes the difficult conversations, they can be challenging and uncomfortable. So can you give an example of maybe some of your more difficult conversations and what you learned about leading those, for perhaps, advice for our students who might need to engage in some of those conversations as they experience life at Western or at Ivey in particular, and especially perhaps any advice you can offer to white folks about how to engage and remain in those and sit in that discomfort and how it benefits their own learning.
Sure. I just think a couple of things we've kind of established ourselves, both here at work, both here in like my own personal circles, is to create the forum that says, let's have the conversation, right? And sometimes you just got to ask, like, are we going to talk about this? Should we talk about it? Is everyone comfortable talking about it, right? If someone's not and they want to step out, don't judge them, don't shun them. But at some point, I think we got to first start with having the conversations. And sometimes as a leader, and that's why I say in everybody's platform, in everybody's circle, maybe you need to start the conversation, right? Maybe you need to host it. Maybe you need to bring up the topic. Like, have you sat down in the lunchroom and said, man, like, are we actually going to talk about what's happening on campus, right? Have you gone up to a group of people and said, hey, like, how do you feel about that? Okay. So I think it's having the conversation. I think after that, and speaking especially to the white participants on the call, sometimes you just got to listen. And you can start the conversation and then just listen. You can join the conversation and say, I'm just here to listen. I got that a lot from a lot of colleagues and friends over the past year. No one's looking for you to solve the problem, right? But I think sometimes just listening, which goes back to educating yourself, helps a lot. I think sometimes people want to know that, especially for people who are white, they are listening, because a lot of these things go unheard. A lot of these feelings go unheard. A lot of times it's internally built up, or it's dealt with in the same circles, but we've got to open up those circles. So sometimes it is just learning and just listening. And again, educate yourself on what's going on. How can you do something about it? You know, it may not be massive. Everything's not going to be a 7-figure check donation to an organization. It's not what it is, right? But when you hear someone using a derogatory term, you can say something. Matter of fact, you can choose just not to use the derogatory term yourself, or you can choose not to listen to that music. You can choose not to support. Or we can go on the positive route. You can choose to support independent businesses or people of color. You can choose to support women's initiatives. You can choose to support the indigenous community. Like, those are the little things you can do to help. So I think I don't want to make it sound like it is just a problem for any one particular race or person of color. I think we've all got to listen. We're all in a very sensitive time right now. We've all got to be involved. Everybody can play their part. Everybody really can. All of you guys have Instagram and TikTok and all these things. You guys, like, who are you following? Take a good look at the people you're following, right? And again, an interesting term there, right? Because you can be a leader in sharing information that's out there that helps to drive the message, that helps to push the positive and the understanding and the education for other people, right? Like, as much time as you spend doing that, just take a moment and think about what good you can do with your platform. So I just think it is really about having the conversations, sharing the information, and making sure you're listening, making sure you're reading, making sure you're understanding what's really going on. If we're talking about all of us becoming better Canadians, how do you do that? Those are some of the first steps that I would take.
Excellent. Thank you. So obviously listening would be a component of this, but what does genuine inclusive leadership look like to you, or to be an inclusive leader? What does it take in terms of competencies or personality traits or your character in an environment with so many challenges and inequities, like you said, racism, all forms of social injustice like gender-based inequality and violence, LGBTQ2S+ rights? So what does genuine inclusive leadership look like for you?
Sure. Inclusive leadership, it does start with, so we've always said that it starts with having a diverse group, right? Like, diversity, you're not inclusive if you're not diverse. You've got to have a diverse group. Now, diversity doesn't just mean race and culture, right? And diversity doesn't just mean gender, but it means perspective and thought, right? Like I want people around me that don't think like me. I'm currently hiring a role right now, and I'm trying to find the one person that is entirely different than the people I already work with, just to have that diverse perspective, for them to challenge my thought, because my thought's not always right. Right? I want them to bring new ideas and fresh ideas in a different mind frame that I don't think about, so that in the room, we're at our best. We are at our strongest. We don't build a basketball team with 5 guys that are 6'7", all the same wingspan, that all have the same shooting percentage. We don't do that. We build a team of weapons. We build a team of diversity just amongst the type of player you are, the kind of skill sets you have, your understanding of the game. We build that so that we can collectively be a better, stronger team. We'll all hit a peak performance when we do that. Well, the same thing applies in this circle here, that as a leader, I want that diverse perspective. Once I've got diverse perspective, I've got to be super intentional about actually including that perspective. There's no point just having the room there to not take all those good ideas and all those good people and actually allow them to contribute. That requires a safe space. That requires an open and honest conversation. And that requires a platform where people feel comfortable to contribute. That's the inclusion part. As a leader, I need to create a platform that allows people to be comfortable, to share their thoughts, share their perspectives, and feel like it's actually valuable to the organization. And that to me is what inclusive leadership looks like. Because otherwise, you've now got people there who have perspective, but they don't actually feel like they're valued. I was once told diversity is bringing as many people as you can to the dance, and inclusion is asking people to dance, right? I mean, you got to ask people for their opinions. You got to ask them for perspectives. And then as a leader, I've got to find a way to implement it. It's not always about me, right? I got to fight, like, even if it's a 60%, like it's not 100% the most solid, how do we make this work, right? Because that is going to foster their development. It's going to foster their growth just by including them in the process. So the other part for me about inclusive leadership that I learned a really, really long time ago was to have smarter people than you in the room. Like I'm here to lead. I'm not here to do. If there's an accountant that is stronger at accounting, I don't need to have somebody that's not better than me at accounting. I need the best accountant in the room. Mm-hmm. I need the best IT person in the room. I need the best manager in the room. And in that way, we'll come together for peak performance. Right? But that is the inclusion part of bringing everyone together at their best to provide their strongest contribution. And then we all move forward together. And then, yes, through my leadership, like I mentioned, people are usually just looking for direction. So that's my ramble on kind of having as many people around you that can help you grow and keeping us as a unit.
Well, that's a wonderful ramble. So thank you very much. You have talked earlier about educating yourself, and my sense within that part of the conversation, it was a little bit in an informal capacity. So what I wanted to ask of you now is what role you see education, like the institutions of education, playing in addressing social injustice and inclusion, and even really business schools in particular. How does this apply to Ivey and our students, if you have any advice there?
Yeah, I am kicking myself because I didn't take more sociology and anthropology and history classes while I was in university, right? It didn't seem interesting to me, right? And now I know why. It's because maybe a lot of times I wasn't familiar with some of the stuff that I could learn. But I think we've got to understand that to know our history, to know the people, to know about people and of people and how we got to this point in life will shape you as a better leader. It'll give you better perspective on the people that you're hiring, the people that you're leading, the people that you're working with, the partners that are going to come to the door and say, we want to work with your organization. If we're talking about rounding out your knowledge base and your ability to make decisions, it's not just going to be based on the 6 principles of marketing. It's not just going to be based on a P&L or a supply and demand. It's not just going to be on how to manage somebody. You're going to have to understand the perspectives, because that is the inclusion part of all of this. Because all of you have a responsibility that as you go to either start your own businesses or lead other businesses or lead other industries, how are you going to comfortably bring in different perspective, different cultures, diversity into your organization if you don't understand them? We live in a world now today where you guys will be taking over this business world. But this business world, your consumer has a different expectation. Your employees will have a different expectation of what they're looking for from you, your service, or your product. Here's the example. Our fans are not just looking to show up to watch us play basketball anymore. They'll buy a ticket, they'll come watch basketball, but they want to be a part of a Raptor nation that takes on these social justice issues. They want to be a part of a Raptor movement that is trying to change the world. It literally affects our bottom line. what I'm doing in my job today is going to have people have a better affinity to the Raptors. They are going to want to buy tickets. They're going to want to be around this organization. They're going to want to be on, not just around this team, they're going to want to be a part of this team. They're going to want to wear that Raptor hat with pride, not just because we're winning basketball games or hosting championship trophies, but what we stand for as an organization is why people are going to want to be a part of the Raptors. That is going to sell tickets, that is going to sell jerseys, that is going to get t-shirts, that is going to have people showing up at Jurassic Park, the whole nine. But if I don't understand the community, if I don't understand the makeup and the demographic of the people we're speaking to, if I can't show up in their neighborhood and relate to them in some capacity, then we'll never have that authentic relationship with them. That's why it's important. That's how it relates back to your business. It really truthfully does. I need you to take every course that you're taking at Ivey. They're all very important. But diversify your perspective. Take those other courses. I majored in psychology. And I majored in psychology simply because it taught me about people. And I took a course and I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Now I understand why my friend acts like an idiot. So I took another course. And then I took another course. It was like, oh, I took adolescent psychology. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I did act like that when I was 16. And I get why boys act like this and girls act like that when they're teen. Oh, you know, I'm gonna take another side. And I just kept taking courses because it made sense. It simply helped shape how I relate to people, how I can understand people. I didn't want to diagnose anybody. I didn't want to give therapy to anybody. But it just made sense. So I just kept taking the courses. Diversify your knowledge base. That's where right now is a very crucial time for you guys to think about what electives you're taking on outside of your core business courses that will help you, because you will have to lead this nation. You will have to lead this industry, but the industry is changing. It really truthfully is.
Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. So this is my last question to you before I turn it over to our students. So students start thinking about some of those things that you'd like to ask John in a moment. But in an interview, you have talked about being a little bit starstruck by Wayne Embry, and you've called him a living legend whose story you want to tell to as many people as you can. So who is Wayne Embry, and why has his story served as an inspiration to you, and what learnings have you drawn from his life that you apply to your own?
Mr. Embry is a friend. Mr. Embry is a mentor. Mr. Embry is an inspiration for me. We are talking about someone that comes from very humble beginnings, born and raised in the state of Ohio, and played basketball. And he didn't have a whole lot of direction on what he wanted to do, but he found a way to continue to progress during a time where progression was extremely hard. If you don't have his book, please go and purchase it, download it, get a paperback if they still have them, called The Inside Game. And I just understand that this is a man that, you know, I think you hear a lot about the massive leaders in the world, but this is a person that did it from the inside. Right. And he did it just based on principles and morals, right? What is the right thing to do and how can he do it? Right. And not wavering from the things his parents had taught him while he was young, and then applying it. And so you talk about someone being the first African-American general manager and the first African-American president in the NBA. Yeah, I'm not here because without him, Masai's not here without him. You know, when you talk about someone who breaks down barriers, and really open doors for people. But every time we talk about that, right, we always seem to be talking about someone from a far distant land or a far distant path, right? Someone that we can read up on, but like, he's here. He's not here right now, but he's here. And so for me, that's why I revel in his presence, right? Just because Mr. Embry was a civil rights leader. Mr. Embry's wife marched across the bridge at Selma, right? Like, they're here. And so to not take advantage of that knowledge transfer, of that energy, that's why I advocate for him for so long. For those of you who follow our team, we are a new team, okay? The 2019 championship team is gone. Serge is gone, Mark is gone, Kawhi is gone, Kyle is gone, right? Norm is gone. That team is gone, right? We actually only had, prior to this Sunday, we only had 4 players, Fred, Pascal, OG, and Chris, that had actually been in Toronto. Anybody that we traded for last year, anybody that we picked up or drafted last year, they'd never actually been to Toronto because of the pandemic. So I say that to say I've got a very young team. I got a very fresh team. So I was thinking, geez, like I want to bring in a guest speaker. Who can we bring in that would, like a former player? Who can we bring in that fire these guys, teach these guys? And I started to realize, similarly, they don't know Mr. Embry and everything he brings that applies directly to them. He's played, he's managed, he's inspired, he's honored, he's in the Hall of Fame. All of these things, I don't need to go and pay for anyone else. I just need to get Mr. Embry here, right? Because when the reckoning happened last year, and we started to talk about the protests, and we started to talk about Black Lives Matter, and we started to talk about anti-Asian hate, right, with respects to COVID, and we were talking about gender equity, Mr. Embry turned to me and said, it's a shame that the same things that he was fighting for 60 years ago, we're still fighting for today. And that touched me. That goes back, honestly, Kim, to your other question about that energy I get to have to get up every morning and do this job. Well, I'd look at Mr. Embry, right? And he reminds me that I got a responsibility. Without saying a word, I have a responsibility to carry on his fight, because he shouldn't be seeing what we're seeing out in the world today. It was supposed to change. So 60 years from now, it's got to change. And I got to do something about it. Mr. Embry is a living legend. And we don't say that in terms of people sometimes, right? We say in terms of, oh yeah, Peyton Manning is a living legend. Wayne Gretzky is a living legend. Yeah, right. Mr. Embry is a true living legend of someone who impacted and changed the world for a lot of people, and he's still here. And so I think he just needs to be celebrated. And if you don't know about him, educate yourself.
There has been a need and a movement for more representation in the upper echelons of the NBA teams. And I'm not talking only about coaches, but I'm talking about like executives. And a lot of people see the Raptors as one of the most inclusive teams in the NBA. So my question to you would be, what role does the Raptors have in helping those other teams who are not yet there, or who want to be there, be more inclusive and have more representation among the executive level?
We've decided we're going to lead it, Joshua. Yeah, Josh, I should say, excuse me. We're going to lead it, right? That we don't know anything else but to be in the forefront, right? Like when we decided we want a championship, we decided we're going to go and get it. And now we're going to champion EDI for all NBA teams. We are the first team, and until about a year ago, the only team in 5 major sports to have a Black African president who oversees all operations for a professional team. We're going to lead it, right? And our for a very long time, over the last 7 to 8 years, as soon as Masai came in the door, the first thing he started to fight for was gender equity. And we increased the amount of women in our organization from 3 to 14 in a short time with respects to having people. And to your point, where we can get better. And I think this is where my role comes in, is looking at the intersection, right? So when we talk about intersectionality, we're not just talking about, okay, we need more Asian people, we need more Black people, we need more women, but we also start to look at how many Black women are in our organization. How many Asian people do we have that are in prominent positions? How many women do we have that are directors and above? So we're going to get better, but we're going to continue to lead it. And we will show the rest of the NBA what it looks like. Because to Kim's point earlier, we are a mosaic here, right? Masai is African, Bobby is half Asian, Teresa is the vice president in a dominant role within our organization. We've got 2 executives that are Black here. We've got so we're just going to continue to lead it. We already know that we're kind of beating other teams in that space, and the scary part is we can get better.
My question is kind of related to what you said about how the team is really young and new. And so all of us have just started this school year together, and we're all in these sections. So my connection to that was, when you're starting out with a team or a group that's really new to each other, how do you go about building a culture that you're proud of and that's inclusive? Because I think that's something that will be really key in making sure that our sections are close, and we build, like we talked about, a blueprint of a culture that we all want to be proud of.
Anna, thanks for the question. Part of the reason I put culture in my title was because I wanted to redefine the culture here in the Raptors. And that's a touchy thing to say, right? Because like we got a pretty good culture here. We won a championship. We're very successful, but I wanted to redefine it. And so when you talk about a blueprint, we're starting from scratch right now, right? And part of that was actually doing an analysis and an intersectional review of the Raptors, right? Like what are our demographics? Where are we deficient? How can we get better, right? And what are our opportunities? Where are we great? What do people value about being a Raptor, an employee here? So I think that's where we start, especially with these young guys, is having some conversations with them. Hey, what's important to you, right? What do you stand for? How can we help you, right? Because that in itself, again, is the inclusion part. It's not just about me saying, okay, our culture is going to be these 5 things and everybody just follow it. That's not what we're doing here. We've got an opportunity to build a culture. And so we want everyone's perspective to be in that, right? From that, I've actually established an equity council, which is a subset, diverse representation of everyone here at the organization that will help drive our culture in terms of where we need to move forward, right? And it'll help take perspective from everybody, so that it's not always my voice that people are listening to, because again, it's not about me, right? And we'll bring together a collective perspective that comes to the leadership team to say, look, here's what people value. Here's what people are lacking. Here's where we can get better. Here's where we're really, really strong. And we'll forge that blueprint. And once that blueprint is forged, it just comes down to accountability and consistency. We'll have to hold everybody accountable to saying this is the way the Raptors are and this is the way we move forward. And we'll have to stay consistent with our behavior. So I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of how we're starting off with what we're calling kind of a refresh here at the Raptors. We're back from Tampa. We're back in our home, brand new team, lots of new staff. It's a perfect opportunity to hit the reset button and say, okay, let's start from scratch.
I got like a 2-part question here, but like 2 years ago, kind of in the bubble, I saw like the Toronto Raptors was the only team that entered the bubble with like the Black Lives Matter painted over the bus. I thought that was pretty cool. For that, like, how did you guys as a team decide to do that? Like, who initiated that idea? The second part of my question would be, did Messiah have any comments for Draymond Green's comment of I know you touched upon that earlier, but like, why do you think Draymond Green got like such little backlash for his comment on there's not like it doesn't matter in Canada?
Yeah. So first of all, Taga, thanks for the question. Would love to say that I was totally involved with the bus, but I hadn't even been hired yet. So I sat there and watched it like all of you guys as a proud moment. But it goes back to the earlier question. We're going to lead in this space, right? And we were the champs, right? And we were not just going to show up like any other team if we were going to say this was important to us. And so the genesis of it was not only showing up in the bubble. People have to understand we were in training camp in close to Naples, Florida. So we drove that bus for 2 hours across the state of Florida. If you guys know my background, I lived in Florida for 7.5 years. Florida is the South. If we're talking about racism and hate, Florida is as South as it gets. So for us to make not only the statement of coming in the bubble, but to drive that bus across the Florida line for 2 hours, we were very proud to say that this is a message that we're standing behind, right? And that we're going to kick in the door and say that this is something that is important to the Raptors. So that was the genesis of it with respects to really sending a strong message that we're here and that we understand it. With respects to Draymond's comment, I think it caught Messiah off guard, to be honest. And Messiah did respond to it. He didn't respond specifically to what's happening in Canada as much as he was responding to, like it doesn't matter if it's an American issue, right? Like we all have a responsibility to be a part of this movement. I think you guys have all seen he's got a humanity brand, which says, let's get back to being, humans. Let's get back to the way we were when we were young before we knew any better. And that was his response. The backlash, again, I don't know why Draymond didn't get more backlash or not. I personally wish I could have spoke to him about it. But there's a concept of leading with empathy. All right, our director of wellness and development had mentioned that to me once. You got to lead with empathy. So sometimes it's not about backlash, right? Sometimes it's about saying Draymond clearly doesn't know any better. I don't know how many times Draymond has been to Canada other than to play basketball. I don't know how many times he's come to see how beautiful and awesome our city is, to see how diverse of a mosaic our city is, and to understand that there's real life problems that exist outside of the things he knows. So I got to lead. I choose to lead with empathy and say he just doesn't know any better. But if I see him, I'll let him know.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate you sharing your lived experiences and the work you've done on discrimination. That's really powerful stuff. You spoke eloquently earlier on challenging subconscious and systemic discrimination. And I'd like to know your perspective on the role and your role of business leaders in challenging more overt discrimination by political leaders. For example, in Quebec, where they passed Bill 21, which permits discrimination against religious minorities, especially Muslim Canadians, and where its leaders denied the existence of systemic racism. How do you see yourself in your role helping to help Canadians stand against and recognize discrimination that's been put forward by a provincial government? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the question, Ethan. It's tricky and it's complicated, is the first thing I'll say. I got to remember sometimes we're a basketball organization, right? Like we're not a social justice or activist organization. So that's where it comes back to, we've just got to use our platform to drive the change that the Raptors want to see. Understanding that we can show up in certain communities and we can help support, amplify, and we can help be there for other organizations. We haven't gotten to the political game anytime soon, other than encouraging people to vote. And by the way, I'm encouraging all of you to make sure you guys go and vote in the federal election. It might be your first time. I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to before, but if we want to change things, you get to vote, and that's how you change it. But I think, I don't know that we're at a place to take on the governments and the politicians as much as we are in a place to go and support the communities. And that's the approach that we take, right? So like for instance, we're going to London. You'll probably see this announcement tomorrow or the day before, because there was a terrorist attack in London on Canadian soil 3 months ago. And we weren't here, so we couldn't really do anything about it, but it's been on my mind the entire time. And the first thing I said is, as soon as we get to Toronto, we're going to London. We're going to go there. And I've been speaking with the Afzal family, to the family that was murdered. And I've been speaking with the Muslim community out there. And it's, what do you need from us? How can we help you? Right? So it was less about, how can the government let this happen? What do the politicians do? It was more about, what can the Raptors do? Because I know as soon as we do something, that will resonate. As soon as we do something, that will carry forward. Our actions will put political pressure on people. I'm firm on that. And it's a long game. Like it's not a short play. It's not a, we do something tomorrow and someone's going to change something. It's a long game, because when I talked about that, people want to be a part of this Raptor Nation. We're powerful. We really are, right? A member of our PR team said, by him going to a certain university, he felt safe in Southern Florida because he would put on his university hat and he felt that no one would mess with him because he was a part of this bigger culture, this bigger team. I want to establish that coast to coast here in Canada. That's where the political pressure will come in. When we can start to show, like it's all about, it's almost like lobbying, right? Like when we can start to show people like, hey, if everybody from Raptor Nation feels this certain way, all of a sudden they're going to start to look at us and say, oh, well, then we need the Raptors on our side. Well, here's what the Raptors stand for. And do you stand for what the Raptors stand for? That's what I'm trying to establish over time. So it's going to be less about standing up to them now, as much as gaining our own political clout by doing the right thing and having more and more people absorb themselves into Raptor Nation. The cool thing about it, Ethan, we are the only team in Canada that unifies coast to coast. Right? When we had a party at our championship, people came from all over, right? They drove, they flew, they wanted to be in those streets of Toronto. If the Leafs won a championship tomorrow, no one from Montreal is coming, right? Like it's just not happening, right? No one from Vancouver is going to care. We unify an entire country. That's the responsibility that I'm realizing. And I think if we can do that, yeah, the politics will start to change as well.
I think first, John, I just want to say thank you so much for just being so candid with us and sharing your experiences. It's honestly super refreshing to hear how passionate you are about what you do. And stemming from that, my question is really, you spoke a little bit about sending that dissertation to some pretty high level executives. And I can only imagine the courage that must have taken as well, if it's something that, you're passionate about, something that you want to see change for. So I just wanted to know if you have any advice for us about how to find that same courage to speak up in those situations and do something similar.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, it's scary. Again, I sat there looking at it for a while, right? And it was just like, is this the moment? Like, is this the moment that I want to do something? But the overcoming that fear was my sense of responsibility. don't talk about it, be about it. That's really what I am, right? Like I'm not the person that sits in the barbershop talking shit about things and then goes after they get their haircut and leave. That's just not me. So at some point I had to send that email. And the fact that, okay, yeah, I sat down, I typed it out. It wasn't easy. I want everyone to understand that. Like I wasn't arrogant. I understood that this might come back to Messiah. It might come back, this could be career suicide. But if I said I wanted to do something, then I had to do something about it, right? And that's kind of how I felt. The other part I left out, I got it, for those of you who read the profile, I worked in the NBA G League for our Raptors 905 team, right? So I wasn't really, this is my second season being a part of the Raptors, right? A year ago, I was just hired with the Raptors. But when George Floyd was murdered, we had a town hall and we were all invited to come on. It was a, let's share, let's talk, let's see how everybody's feeling. Everybody in our Raptors organization, all the players were on the call. But I felt like, what was the point of this, right? And for myself, who've been around racism for a while now, I felt like this was just a cycle. I felt like nothing was gonna happen. So Messiah came on, he was talking to us and he just said, look, I promise we're not gonna let this conversation die. I promise we're gonna let this continue. I didn't believe him. So I unmuted my phone and I was like, I'm holding you accountable to that. But my hand was like this when I went to hit the button. But again, I just had this sense of, if someone doesn't say something, if we don't challenge what's out there, whether it's my boss or not, if we don't challenge it, it'll never change. And I said, look, I don't believe you. I'm holding you accountable that this is the same thing that happened to Rodney King 30-something years ago. There's no difference. And we were about to go play in the bubble. So I just felt like, okay, you know what? Everybody's about to turn back to basketball and forget everything that just happened. Because there were countless people that were murdered before that and no one cared. But I knew I had to do it. It's almost like you know, you get that scary moment or you're on a roller coaster and you just close your eyes and say, screw it, I'm gonna do it. That's where I was, right? And that, if that's courage, then call it courage. If that's just kind of a blind approach to doing the right thing, sure. I don't know if I'm a courageous person, but I do know I'm a direct and passionate person about how I feel. And I have a heightened sense of responsibility in my life right now to do something. I'm in a place where I know I can use my platform to do something. And again, I look back and I say, look, like, so many people before me have done stuff and there's so many people coming that need opportunities. What am I doing with my time in my life? And that's the reason why I did it. So I would just say, take stock and perspective of your life. What can you accomplish today? What are you doing for someone that you care about to help them for tomorrow? Who's done things ahead of you that have helped you get to the point that you're at today? Because when you put those things in perspectives, it should fill you with an energy of action.
Thanks so much for that answer, John. Students whose hands remain up and questions unanswered, I'm sorry that we don't have time to get to those today. We are at the end of our time here. I think the fact that there are so many remaining questions speaks to the richness of this conversation. John, it has been an honor and a privilege to speak to you today. It was an extraordinary conversation. And so I really want to thank you for this opportunity. But that is actually not my role in closing out this session. So I'm now going to call on Ivey's HBA Program Director, Mary Wheel, who will offer a formal thank you and provide closing remarks.
Thanks, Kim. And thank you, John. It's been a wide-ranging discussion, and I really appreciate the amount that you've shared with us in terms of yourself. There are lasting comments that the students are going to remember, that I'm going to remember for a long time. I really appreciated your focus on positivity in terms of, I will leave it on my wall somewhere, that we have to have wins along the way, because too often we get mired in the negativity. We're scrolling through the news late at night, sometimes when we wake up during those long, gray, lonely hours in the middle of the night. And I will remind myself that we have to have those wins along the way. And in terms of the morning speakers, I also want to thank them for what they've given us, the pieces of themselves that they gave us. Jamie's comment that when there's a crash, is that the time to put your foot on the gas instead of automatically hitting the brakes? What does that look like in your world and in our world? And Students, I want to thank you for your time and for your attention today. As you work with your teams at Ivey, I echo Rashid's comment from the morning about embracing the power of difference and inviting in the differences. It has been a great day today, a great day of discussing leadership, about thinking about leadership. Thank you to Gerard, to Kim, to Sarah, and the team for the vision of HBA Leadership Day. Gerard, you are tireless in investing your energy in creating a day like this and other days that we do as well, with diversity, with empathy, and with the possibility of inspiring people. So thank you to all of those, and also the guests. So each of the students, each section had an individual guest in their classroom, and so thanks to those guests as well. We are finished for the day, so thank you, everyone.